Welcome in. It is incredibly good to have you sitting down with us today.
Yeah, really glad you're here with us.
We are taking a custom-tailored deep dive today into a document. It's simply titled 38, the Fall.pdf.
Right, and it comes with this really striking accompanying artwork, too.
It really does. And the mission for our time together, the goal here, is to completely reframe one of the most, really one of the most pervasive fundamental narratives in all of human history.
Absolutely, because when you hear the phrase the fall, the immediate cultural programming kicks in.
Right. You think of the traditional religious narrative.
Exactly, the pristine garden,
Yeah.
the tragic mistake, the introduction of sin.
And then the subsequent cosmic punishment.
Right, the exile.
Yeah.
But the source material we are pulling apart today just completely discards that framework entirely.
Throws it out.
It posits instead that the fall is a necessary and actually entirely natural, vital transition into human consciousness and self-determination.
It argues it isn't a fall from grace at all.
No, not at all.
It's a fall into awareness.
No.
Okay, let's unpack this because the author anchors this entire premise right from the jump with a quote from Carl Jung,
Yeah, the quote is, "The fall of man in paradise is the fall into consciousness."
which is such a heavy way to start.
It is. That Jungian framework completely changes the gravity of the narrative. By defining the Garden of Innocence as a state of unconsciousness, Jung is basically suggesting that while that pristine state might be safe, and harmonious.
You aren't really a person yet.
Exactly. You are not actually a fully realized individual while you inhabit it. You are basically unformed. You're just part of the scenery.
Right.
To become a distinct autonomous entity, you have to leave that garden. And that departure, well, it requires a rupture.
A break.
Yes. The author of this document takes that psychological abstraction and maps it out with a really high degree of precision. And they begin with that visual anchor we mentioned.
Which perfectly sets the trajectory for all the concepts we're going to explore.
It really does.
The illustration provided in the text, it's this stark black and white piece.
Mm-hmm.
And the geometry of it tells the whole story before you even read a single word of the philosophy.
It really does. The central image is a spiral staircase, but the architectural integrity of it changes drastically from the bottom to the top.
Right, it's not a uniform structure.
No. Down at the foundation, you see the staircase is grounded in the flower of life geometry.
That ancient repeating pattern.
Yeah, the perfectly overlapping circles, it signifies ultimate harmony and interconnectedness. And rooted right there at the bottom is the tree of life, perfectly symmetrical and contained within a sphere.
So it's very safe, very balanced.
Exactly. This bottom section represents that initial inherited state of childhood. It is the pre-conscious garden. You are safe, you are contained, and the paradigm of your reality is just, well, it's provided to you.
But the author uses that spiral staircase to force the eye upward. And that's where the structure fundamentally changes.
The solid masonry literally begins to disintegrate.
Yeah, as the stairs ascend, they just break apart.
Yeah.
By the time you reach the peak, the steps aren't connected to a central pillar anymore.
They aren't even connected to each other.
No, they fracture into these jagged, floating stones that are dispersing out into a chaotic, dark void. The sacred geometry of the foundation just completely shatters.
And that disintegration at the top maps out the entire arc of this deep dive. We are looking at the transition from that structured, inherited existence, ascending through the development of the ego, right up to the terrifying shattering of the paradigms that initially built us.
That visual of the foundation disintegrating perfectly illustrates the first major concept the text tackles, which is the actual mechanics of selfhood and separation.
Right, how we become individuals.
Exactly. To understand what the author means by the fall, we have to scrutinize how we conceptualize ourselves as we move out of that childhood garden.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the psychology of that rooted tree of life at the bottom of the image. In early childhood, before your personal fall, you exist in a state of absolute deference.
You don't have your own rules yet.
Right. You aren't navigating the world based on your own internal compass. You rely on an external authority.
Parents, teachers, cultural traditions.
They provide the map. If something goes wrong, the responsibility ultimately lies with the architects of that map. You inhabit a paradigm you had absolutely no hand in building.
And remaining in that state means you never have to face the terror of absolute responsibility.
It's comfortable.
Very comfortable. But the text argues that the fall is triggered when that soft, sort of permeable, inherited sense of self begins to calcify.
It hardens.
Yes. We stop accepting the inherited boundaries and start forming a distinct identity. And the mechanism for that transition, according to the source, hinges on the moment we begin asking one highly specific question.
What's in it for me?
Exactly, what's in it for me?
The text treats that question as the literal biting of the apple.
It really is the catalyst.
The moment you start analyzing the outcome of a situation specifically against your own personal desires, rather than simply obeying the external authority, your autonomous self is crystallizing. You are bending your cognition around your own isolated needs.
What's fascinating here is how the source describes the immediate architectural consequence of that crystallization.
The building of the wall.
Yes. By constantly filtering reality through the lens of what's in it for me, we force a massive duality onto our experience. We draw a hard boundary line.
Separating ourselves from everything else.
Exactly. On one side is the inner sense of self, your desires, your secrets, your distinct thoughts, and on the other side is external objective reality, which the text reduces simply to the other.
So you are no longer seamlessly integrated into the whole.
No, you are a walled-off entity operating against the backdrop of the universe. And the text points out that this boundary is maintained and strengthened by specific behaviors.
And it specifically highlights the act of lying.
Yes.
Which really reframes childhood development quite a bit. Society generally treats lying as a straightforward moral failure, something to be corrected immediately.
Yeah, a bad habit.
But in the context of this document, a child learning to lie seems to be framed as a necessary developmental tool to achieve this separation.
That is the uncomfortable truth the text is getting at. Lying is the ultimate assertion of a divided reality.
How so?
Well, when you lie, you are consciously creating and maintaining a distinct inner reality that directly contradicts the shared external reality. You are basically proving to yourself that your mind is a fortress that the other cannot access.
Yeah, casting the walls.
Exactly. And the text argues that the more energy you put into maintaining this distinct inner experience, the wider the chasm between the inner self and the outer world becomes. You isolate yourself within your own self-conceptualization.
And this isolation leads directly to what the author categorizes as the demonic potential of pride.
Yes, that's a really intense term they use.
It is. The text states that if this hardening of the ego goes unchecked, it takes on deeply destructive qualities. But what I found particularly counterintuitive is how the author explains the root of this pride.
The naming aspect.
Right. They reference the king of the demons from Western religious thought, but they don't attribute his terrifying pride to some grand cosmic malice.
No, there's no inherent magical evil there.
Right. The text argues his pride stems simply from the act of being named.
It is a profound existential observation. Having a name, a distinct label, is the ultimate demarcation of separation.
Because it creates a category.
Exactly. When you are named, you are fundamentally asserting, I am this and I am emphatically not that. It solidifies the boundary we just talked about.
It draws a line in the sand.
And once you have that boundary, once you have an identity separated from the whole, the natural psychological reflex is to defend it, to elevate it, to prioritize it.
To protect the fortress.
Yes. The pride that fuels the darkest aspects of selfish rebellion doesn't require magical evil. It just requires you to identify so completely with your separate name that you elevate your own survival and desires above the harmony of the interconnected universe.
You put yourself first no matter what.
Right. You justify the damage you do to the other because you are so fiercely protecting the me.
So the very tool required for autonomy, having a distinct identity, is simultaneously the incubator for the kind of adversarial pride that destroys harmony.
It's a paradox.
It really is.
Ugh.
But the document doesn't use this as a cautionary tale to keep you in the garden. It doesn't suggest that because pride has demonic potential, you should avoid self-determination altogether.
Not at all.
It insists that this rebellion is an absolutely necessary transition.
That is the core subversion of the text. It demands that you walk through that fire.
You can't skip it.
No. And the author provides very grounded examples to illustrate that this isn't some ancient mythological event. It is an active process happening in the life of every single person attempting to individuate.
The text lists a variety of ways this personal fall manifests. And it's striking how mundane some of them are compared to the mythological weight of the concept.
They're very relatable milestones.
Yeah, like the stereotypical rebellious teenage phase is the most obvious one. That visceral, often really messy rejection of parental authority. But the author notes it can happen later in life too, or in much more intellectual ways. It could be the moment a person deeply interrogates and discards the scientific or religious frameworks they were raised in.
Or it could be the act of coming out regarding sexuality.
Let's look closely at that specific example because coming out perfectly illustrates the mechanics of this stage.
It really does.
When someone comes out, they are actively rejecting a paradigm that society or their family has superimposed on them.
They're saying your map is wrong.
Yes, they are asserting their distinct inner reality over the inherited external expectation. It is a profound act of self-determination, and it requires shattering the old structure to make room for the authentic self.
It's a perfect example of tearing down the old tree of life.
The text also points to taking over one's own finances and possessions as a manifestation of the fall. How does the what's in it for me psychology apply there?
Well, think about it. When you are financially dependent, you are still existing under the canopy of someone else's tree of life.
You're on their payroll.
Right. They provide the resources, and because of that, they dictate the boundaries. The moment you take total ownership of your finances, you are stepping into absolute material accountability.
Which is terrifying.
It is, because every decision you make now has a direct consequence on your survival. You are forced to operate through the lens of self-interest and self-preservation to build your own structure in the world.
If you don't look out for yourself, you fail.
Exactly. It is a harsh, highly practical realization of duality. It's you against the economy.
The author also includes drug use as a potential catalyst for this transition, drawing from their own lived experience. And whether it's through substances, financial independence, or intellectual rebellion, the common thread is the dismantling of the old paradigm.
Tearing down the walls of the garden.
Right. But once you break away from the inherited rules, you are operating in uncharted territory. What actually governs your decision-making in that void, according to the text?
This is where pride becomes your primary navigational tool, for better or worse. Because you have discarded the external authority, you have to test the fences of reality for yourself.
You have to figure out where the edge is.
Right. The author describes this phase as wandering moralistically. You don't have a map anymore, so your pride tells you that your own judgments, your own desires, and your own interpretations are somehow superior to the rules you just left behind.
You assume you know best.
Yes. You push boundaries just to see if they hold. You are operating on the assumption that your newly formed ego is capable of charting the course.
It is a necessary arrogance, really.
Yeah.
You have to believe you know better in order to justify leaving the safety of the garden in the first place.
Precisely. You must dismiss the taught paradigms to construct an authentic self. The old building has to be condemned and torn down before you can lay a new foundation.
That concept of demolition leads us right into one of the most complex and analytical sections of the deep dive.
It's a dense section.
It is. The author unpacks their subjective experience with what they call the alchemical shortcut, the use of intoxicants and altered states in the pursuit of mysticism and paradigm breaking.
And we need to be explicitly clear on the framing here.
Yes, absolutely. The author of the document states very clearly that they neither condone nor condemn the use of intoxicants. They are presenting an objective analysis of how these substances interact with the mechanics of spiritual development.
And we are maintaining that exact same impartiality.
Correct. We are simply examining the historical and psychological architecture the author presents. We are not taking a stance on the substances themselves.
It is a clinical exploration of a very chaotic subject. The text points out that the pursuit of spiritual alchemy has historically been deeply intertwined with the use of mind-altering substances.
Right. It's not a new phenomenon.
No. The author notes that medieval and contemporary alchemists routinely worked with materials like mercury and other heavy metals.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Extremely. The text suggests that many of them likely suffered from severe heavy metal toxicity, which fundamentally alters the nervous system and cognition.
The text builds a really strong historical case for this overlap. It mentions the advent of distillation and how readily available high-proof alcohol was to monastic alchemists.
Noting the prevalence of alcoholism among astute mystical writers.
Right. It also references the massive quantities of cannabis utilized in Shaivite Hinduism as a sacred vehicle. It even pulls from literature, highlighting how opium and laudanum directly fueled the visionary output of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and even touches on its influence in the circle surrounding Tolkien.
There is an undeniable lineage of creators and seekers using these chemical compounds.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of dismantling paradigms, the text offers a functional explanation for why these substances are so prevalent in the history of mysticism.
Right. The goal of the fall is to break out of the conditioned reality you inherited. Achieving the ability to see past that conditioning through disciplined meditation takes years, sometimes a lifetime, of rigorous effort.
It's incredibly slow.
Yes. The text argues that intoxicants serve as a violent, sudden shortcut.
They bypass the discipline entirely.
Exactly. They forcefully alter the neurochemistry, giving the user a fleeting, unearned experience of a reality outside their normal conditioning.
It's like hacking the system.
It is. It doesn't necessarily give them the truth, but it does something crucial. It shatters their confidence in the absolute solidity of their normal waking reality.
Because suddenly they see something else.
Right. Once you experience an altered state, the brain is forced to concede that the paradigm it normally operates within is just one of many possible configurations. The subjective reality is profoundly destabilized.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The author doesn't just analyze altered states as a tool for breaking paradigms. They introduce a highly specific, deeply profound theory about the underlying mechanics of addiction itself.
Yes.
The text proposes what we can call the jhana hypothesis.
This hypothesis is arguably the most radical and thought-provoking assertion in the entire document.
I would agree.
The author questions whether the root of all addiction is actually a misunderstood, misplaced craving for deeply unified meditative states, specifically what the Pali traditions call jhana.
To really grasp this, we need to slow down and dissect the specific Pali terminology the author includes in their study guide. What exactly does jhana refer to in this context?
Jhana refers to stages of profound, luminous meditative absorption. It is a state where the mind becomes completely unified, dropping all the dualistic fiction of the ego we discussed earlier.
So that wall disappears.
Yes, it is the pinnacle of spiritual discipline. What the text is suggesting is that when someone consumes an intoxicant, the substance artificially suppresses the ego's normal anxieties and constructs, and it does this just enough to create a low-grade environment for components of jhana to spontaneously arise.
So the person takes the drug, and what they're actually experiencing isn't just a chemical high. They are accidentally tripping over the profound spiritual states that monks spend decades trying to access.
Yes. The text breaks down the specific components of this state. The user might experience piti.
Which translates to what?
It translates to an intense physical rapture or joy.
Right.
They might touch sukha, which is a deep, pervasive happiness and contentment.
Wow.
And they might even brush up against upekkha, which is absolute equanimity. The profound sense that the universe is perfectly balanced and everything is exactly as it should be.
That fundamentally changes how we view the hook of addiction. If someone whose entire life is defined by the painful duality and isolation of the ego suddenly experiences the rapture of piti and the perfect peace of upekkha, the relief would be overwhelming.
It would feel like absolute salvation.
Yeah.
But this is where the alchemical shortcut reveals its fatal flaw. Because the individual used a chemical to bypass the discipline required to achieve this state naturally, they have no understanding of how to return to it on their own.
They don't have the map.
Exactly. The substance becomes the sole key to the kingdom, and this dynamic generates ta'at.
Kanha being the intense craving or thirst.
Correct. The tancha attaches itself fiercely to the intoxicant. The tragedy the text outlines is that true jhana is entirely dependent on a foundation of clear consciousness and stringent morality.
Which an addict usually struggles to maintain.
Right. You cannot maintain a unified, selfless state of mind if you are constantly engaging in the selfish behaviors required to maintain an addiction.
The lying, the hiding, the manipulation, all the things we established earlier as the very mechanisms that build the wall of the ego.
Exactly. The moral decline required to feed the addiction acts as an increasingly dense psychological barrier.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is. The ego is actively reinforcing its walls through deceptive behavior, while simultaneously trying to use the drug to tear those very walls down to reach the unified state of sukha. The text proposes that this internal friction is the actual mechanical explanation for tolerance.
That is a staggering way to look at tolerance.
It shifts the entire perspective.
It's not just the biological receptors downregulating. It is the psychological barrier of moral compromise thickening. You need massive amounts of the substance to try and batter down the very walls you are building with your deceptive behavior just to get a glimpse of that initial rapture.
And eventually, it stops working entirely. The text cites both the Bhagavad Gita and Buddhist traditions, warning that intoxicants can only ever provide a false viewpoint.
They don't offer real clarity.
No, they allow access only to false realms because the foundation they are built on is fundamentally compromised. The user is trapped in a paradox. The drug that once dissolved the ego is now the primary reason the ego is so rigidly defended.
This analysis leads directly to the author's highly pragmatic lived experience advice on the matter. Having explored this alchemical path, their ultimate conclusion is uncompromising.
Abandon the intoxicants.
Right. The author points out that achieving genuine jhana isn't some impossible mystical feat. It is highly accessible once a person learns to naturally settle their mind.
And crucially, it is free.
It doesn't require a chemical dependency. The text concedes that a person might make some initial paradigm-breaking progress using intoxicants, but they will inevitably hit a hard ceiling.
The moral and psychological compromises will always cap their spiritual development.
This shortcut becomes a labyrinth they have to escape before any real work can begin.
It is a deeply sobering assessment. It validates the profound experiences people have in altered states while ruthlessly dissecting why those states cannot be sustained without destroying the user.
And that concept of hitting a hard ceiling, of the structure failing, brings us to the darkest and most volatile phase of the fall.
Right, moving into the consequences of building our identity on that unstable ground.
The text explores the archetype of the tower and the descent into the darkness. The author shares a highly specific, visceral dream they experienced about 2 decades prior to drafting this document.
And this dream occurred precisely when their own internal paradigm was fracturing.
Particularly regarding their shifting views on the viability of intoxicants. In the dream, the author is scaling a spiral staircase up a massive tower. The architecture is unique. It's made of an invisible substance, but they can clearly perceive the individual floating steps forming an ascending spiral.
Okay.
But without any warning, the structural integrity vanishes. All the floating stones collapse simultaneously, and the author plummets down with the debris.
The synchronicity between that dream narrative and the visual artwork at the beginning of the document is impossible to ignore.
It's the exact same image.
It is. The disintegrating staircase at the top of the illustration is a literal rendering of the dream. The solid foundation gives way to floating stones, which inevitably cascade into the void.
The author even points out that this motif of sudden catastrophic structural failure maps perfectly onto a specific archetype.
The tarot card of the tower.
Yes. The author linking this to the tower card makes perfect sense. That archetype of sudden, violent upheaval lightning striking the crown of a building that was constructed on false premises is exactly what is happening to the ego at this stage of the fall.
It's the moment the universe proves your self-conceptualization is fundamentally flawed.
It is this psychological whiplash of individuation. When you first step into the rebellion we discussed earlier, it feels incredibly potent. You are defying the inherited rules, you are exercising your what's in it for me muscle.
And that selfish drive can usually propel you to significant material heights.
Right, you feel like you are rapidly ascending that invisible spiral staircase. You are achieving your goals.
But because the entire structure is built on the isolated, prideful ego, because the stones are floating, disconnected from the harmonious tree of life, it lacks true structural integrity.
A life built entirely on separation and self-interest cannot withstand the weight of reality forever.
So the collapse is inevitable. Let's ground this in a modern context. What does that collapse actually look like?
It could be the sudden destruction of a career you compromised your ethics to build.
Or it could be the explosive end of a marriage where the communication was built on maintained dualities and hidden inner realities.
It's the moment the coping mechanisms and the pride absolutely fail to protect you.
And that failure plunges you directly into what the alchemical tradition calls the Nigredo.
The Nigredo. The text uses some incredibly heavy language to describe this state.
Nigredo is the stage of blackness, of putrefaction. The author plainly equates it to being stranded in hell.
That's a stark description.
It is. It is the stage where the false identity you constructed is reduced to ash. Think about the psychological reality of putrefaction. The pride that fueled your rebellion rots away because it no longer yields any satisfaction.
The duality and isolation you worked so hard to maintain become an unbearable prison.
You are sitting in the rubble of your own ego, completely stripped of your illusions, with no inherited paradigm to retreat to. It is a state of profound disorientation and suffering.
But the document makes a massive philosophical pivot here. It insists that this hell is not a punishment for your rebellion.
No, it is a strict prerequisite for authenticity.
The author states that true alchemy must begin in hell.
You cannot transmute lead into gold if you haven't first reduced the material to its absolute base blackened state. You cannot build a genuine integrated self until the false ego-driven tower has been entirely demolished.
The Nigredo is the clearing of the board.
Only when you are sitting in that total darkness, holding absolute responsibility for the rubble around you, is actual, profound change possible.
So what does this all mean? We have mapped out this massive trajectory. We have left the unconscious safety of the childhood garden. We built a proud, isolated tower of ego. We tested the boundaries, perhaps getting lost in the perilous, alchemical shortcuts of altered states.
And we have watched our fragile tower collapse, dropping us into the putrefaction of the Nigredo.
How does the text suggest we navigate out of the rubble?
The author provides the framework for reconstruction using another foundational alchemical principle, solve et coagula.
Dissolution and recombination.
Yes.
We have spent this entire time exploring the solve.
Exactly. The fall, the tearing down of the inherited paradigms, the shattering of the ego's tower, the descent into the Nigredo, all of that is the solve. It is the necessary dissolution of the false structures.
But you can't stay in the Nigredo.
You must begin the coagula. You have to take the blackened raw material of your experience and recombine it to construct a conscious, authentic understanding of reality.
And the document moves from abstract philosophy to highly practical instruction here. The author includes a study guide specifically designed for you, the listener, to execute this coagula.
It treats this text not just as an analytical essay, but as a practical map for your own integration.
The tools provided are rigorous and demanding. First and foremost, the text mandates a daily meditation practice.
If you recall the discussion on abandoning the intoxicant shortcuts to find pure jhana naturally, this is where that work lives. You have to train the mind to settle without chemical intervention.
Second, it emphasizes the importance of meticulously journaling your spiritual and psychological experiences.
When you are navigating the chaos of the Nigredo, keeping a record allows you to identify the recurring patterns. It helps you decode your own dream symbolism, much like the author did with the floating staircase.
The guide also pushes for the continuous, mindful observation of your own mental habits. It asks you to remain vigilant, to catch the ego when it tries to slip back into that what's in it for me duality.
And deeply entwined with this observation is the intense practice of shadow work.
Shadow work is the engine of the coagula. It requires you to look directly at the demonic seeds we identified in the very first segment.
You have to examine the selfishness, the adversarial pride, the lust, and the anger that fueled your initial rebellion.
But instead of repressing them or allowing them to dictate your behavior blindly, you have to integrate them.
Right.
But how does one actually transmute a demonic seed into conscious wisdom? If your tower collapsed because of your own selfish ambition, how do you integrate that ambition without rebuilding the exact same flawed tower?
You have to understand the function of the ambition without attaching your identity to it. You acknowledge that the fire of that ambition was necessary to get you out of the garden.
But you strip away the pride that says the ambition makes you superior to the other.
You take the raw energy of the shadow and tether it to a conscious, interconnected purpose rather than an isolated, selfish desire. You learn to wield the tools of your ego without being enslaved by them.
This raises an important question, actually. The study guide provides a series of intense reflection prompts designed specifically for you to locate yourself on this map.
Think about the trajectory of your own life. What foundational paradigms or inherited belief systems have you actively rejected?
And more importantly, have you done the work to replace them with something truly authentic? Or are you still defining yourself merely by your rebellion against the old structure?
And we have to interrogate the nature of our pride. How has your relationship with self-determination evolved?
When you first initiated your own fall, your pride was likely the weapon you used to carve out your space. Has that pride matured?
Has it led you into the darkness of the Nigredo? And have you developed the tools to navigate your way out? What function did that rebellion serve?
Was it merely destructive? Or can you now recognize it as the necessary fire that cleared the ground for your actual adult self?
These are not questions you answer in an afternoon. They are prompts to sit with for years.
But the text does offer indicators to show you that the coagula is working. As you integrate the shadow and establish your discipline, you will notice a deep, grounded comfort with your own personal authority.
You won't feel the frantic need to rebel against external structures just to prove you exist. You will begin to experience what the author beautifully terms the natural unfoldment of spiritual insight.
It is the completion of the cycle. You move from the unconscious harmony of the inherited garden through the vital, chaotic fires of self-discovery and separation, and finally arrive at a conscious, chosen, integrated harmony.
It really brings everything full circle.
Let's pull all of this together and look at the massive terrain we have crossed today. We began rooted in the unconscious safety of the tree of life,
We examine the birth of the ego, the hardening of the self.
and the introduction of duality through the simple, profound question of what's in it for me.
We explored the necessity of pride and rebellion in dismantling our inherited conditioning.
We waded into the complexities of spiritual alchemy, analyzing the perilous shortcuts of intoxicants and the staggering hypothesis that addiction is an agonizing craving for pure meditative absorption, thwarted by the moral decay of the ego.
We faced the terrifying disintegration of the tower, plummeting into the putrefaction and necessary suffering of the Nigredo.
And finally, we discussed the arduous work of solve et coagula, gathering the shattered stones of our identity to reconstruct a conscious, authentic existence.
The ultimate thesis of this document is a radical reclamation of our own narrative. The fall is not a failure of the human spirit. It is not a cosmic error.
It is the definitive evidence that you are stepping into your own authority. It is the painful, chaotic, absolutely essential birth canal required for genuine spiritual awakening.
It is exactly what Jung promised, the fall into consciousness.
And as we wrap up this custom deep dive, our expert has one final, highly provocative thought to leave you with, a concept that takes the brilliant logic of the text we just explored and pushes it to its absolute limit.
I want to draw your attention back to the most fundamental insight we discussed regarding the creation of the ego. We established that the very root of selfish pride, the catalyst for our inner division and the architect of our fragile tower, is the simple act of being named.
Having that distinct label.
The assumption of a distinct identity separate from the universe creates the boundary of the ego. We have spent this entire time detailing how to break down old, false paradigms to construct a new, authentic identity. But here is the ultimate provocation. If the foundational cause of our separation and suffering is the act of holding an identity at all, and if the ultimate goal of the spiritual practitioner is to achieve the unified, selfless absorption of pure jhana, does true awakening demand that we eventually figure out how to unname ourselves?
Wow.
After surviving the Nigredo and painstakingly rebuilding your authentic self, will the final step of the journey require you to willingly abandon the very identity you just worked so hard to build?
That is a staggering thought to carry with you. Thank you for sitting down with us and engaging with such profound material. We hope this custom deep dive provided the perspective and the aha moments you were looking for. We look forward to tearing into the next stack of sources with you. Until then, keep observing your paradigms and take care of yourselves.